Welcome. What's up, guys? I'm the Excel controller. Today we are taking control of the data. Welcome back to Excel Controller. In today's lesson, we are going to learn one of the most useful Excel functions for financial analysis and reporting, the if function. The if function allows Excel to make a decision based on a condition. In simple terms, we can tell Excel to look at a value, ask a question, and return one result if the answer is yes and another result if the answer is no. That may sound simple, but this is extremely useful in finance. Controllers constantly make decisions based on conditions. Is actual expense greater than budget? Is revenue above target? Is an invoice paid? Is a customer past due? Is a variance large enough to investigate? Is a transaction missing information? Without formulas, we might review these conditions manually. With if functions, Excel can evaluate them for us across hundreds or thousands of rows. Here's a common reporting challenge. Imagine it is the first morning after month end. You receive a report containing hundreds or thousands of transactions. Management wants you to identify which expense items are over budget so department leaders can explain the variances. You could scan the report line by line and manually identify the items that need attention. But that is slow, and it is easy to miss something. Instead, we can create a formula that tells Excel to look at each variance and label it automatically. For example, we can tell Excel, if actual expense is greater than budget, display the words over budget. Otherwise, display the words within budget. That one formula can then be copied down hundreds of rows. This is where if functions become valuable. We're not just calculating numbers. We're building logic into our spreadsheets. Today we'll start with the basic if function, then apply it to real financial examples. We'll use budgeting, variance analysis, revenue tracking, payroll, reconciliations, and operational reporting. By the end of the lesson, you should understand not only how to write a formula, but also when to use one and how to check that the logic is actually correct. Let's start with the basic structure of an if function. Click cell A1 and type 100. Click cell B1 and type 75. Click cell C1 and type =, if, open parenthesis, A1 greater than symbol B1, comma. Yes, comma. No, close parenthesis. And press enter. Excel returns yes because the value in A1 is greater than the value in B1. Let's break that formula into three parts. The first part is the condition. In our example, the condition is A1 greater than B1. The second part is what Excel should return when that condition is true. We told Excel to return yes. The third part is what Excel should return when the condition is false. We told Excel to return no. So the basic structure is if, followed by condition, then the result if true, then the result if false. The formula bar shows the actual formula. When reviewing a financial spreadsheet, don't just look at the number. Click the cell and inspect the formula behind it. Now the result changes to no because 50 is not greater than 75. This is the basic behavior of an if function. Excel asks a question. If the answer is true, it returns the first result. If the answer is false, it returns the second result. These operators allow us to define the condition Excel should evaluate. In D1 type =, if. Open parenthesis. Select A1. Greater than sign and =. 100. Comma. Target met. Comma. Below target. Close parenthesis and press enter. The result is target met because A1 is equal to 100. Now I change to 99 and the result changes to below target. Notice that we use greater than or equal to. That means exactly 100 qualifies. If we had used only greater than, exactly 100 would not qualify. That small difference can have a major impact in financial reporting. Always make sure the comparison operator matches the business rule. In E1 type =, if, open parenthesis, A1, greater than sign, =, 100, comma, A1, asterisk symbol for multiplication, 10%, comma, 0, and close parenthesis, and press enter. Now Excel returns either 10% of A1 or 0. The result of an if function does not have to be text. It could be a number or another calculation. For example, we might calculate a bonus only when a sales target is met, or calculate a reserve only when an account exceeds a threshold. One final best practice. Make the business rule clear before writing the formula. Ask yourself, what condition am I testing? What should happen when the condition is true? What should happen when the condition is false? If you can answer those three questions, the formula becomes much easier to build and audit. Now we're going to build a simple budget review. The first step is calculating the variance. Simple SUM formula on cell D2. C2 minus B2. That's the actual results versus the budget. Copy the formula from D2 through D6. Now we have the dollar variance for each department. Next, we'll use an if function to identify whether the department is over budget. If formula, we are looking to see if C2 is greater than B2. If true, the result will be over budget. If false, the result will be within budget. Operations is labeled over budget because actual expense is greater than budget. Now Excel evaluates every department using the same business rule. Now I'm going to change the sales actual amount to $325,000. The sales status immediately changes to over budget. We change the source data, and the decision updated automatically. This is the power of the if function. We are turning a business rule into a repeatable calculation. We're going to add a column for review flag. The result will be review if D2 is greater than $20,000, and OK if it's under $20K. This is a simple example of using formulas to prioritize management attention. A controller may not have time to investigate every line item. A threshold can help identify which items deserve a closer look. Now, let's discuss a common mistake. Incorrect logic. Notice that we reverse the logic. The formula is valid Excel syntax, but the business logic is wrong. This is an important lesson for financial analysts and controllers. Excel can tell you whether a formula is valid. It cannot tell you whether your business rule is correct. Whenever you build an if function, test both sides of the condition. Test a value that should return the true result and a value that should return the false result. Now let's use if functions in a monthly close scenario. Our report contains budget and actual results. Management wants to know which accounts are unfavorable and which ones require investigation. First, we will calculate the variance. Next, we will identify if the variance is in favor to a positive result or unfavorable. Because these are expense accounts, a positive variance means actual expense is higher than budget. We therefore label the result unfavorable. For a revenue report, the same comparison could have the opposite meaning. Actual revenue above budget would normally be favorable. The Excel function has not changed. The business logic has. That is why controllers need to understand the financial meaning behind the formula. We're now using the ABS function inside the if function. ABS returns the absolute value of a number, removing the negative sign. This allows us to identify large variances regardless of whether they are positive or negative. Our formula says, if the absolute value of the variance is at least 20,000, display investigate. Otherwise, display no action. The variance tells us what changed. The if function tells us whether the change requires attention. Now, the same basic if logic is being used for revenue performance. For revenue, actual greater than or equal to budget is a positive result. This demonstrates why the formula should always be connected to a clearly defined business rule. Now we're going to build a more advanced operational example. Our first KPI will be revenue per employee. Now we'll use an if function to determine whether each location is meeting our productivity threshold. The threshold in this example is $20,000 of revenue per employee. In a real business, the threshold would come from management expectations, historical performance, a budget, or another approved benchmark. Now let's make the threshold easier to change. We add dollar signs to the cell reference. The dollar signs create an absolute reference. In this case, a dollar sign in front of both the column and row locks the reference for cell I2. When we copy the formula down, every row continues to reference I2. This is a very important technique in financial models. If management changes the target from 20,000 to 22,000, we only need to change the assumption cell. Watch the performance results update automatically. This is much better than hard coding 20,000 into every formula. Now we will go a little more advanced and combine formulas. In this case, this is called a nested if because one if function is placed inside another. The first test asks whether the location meets the full target. If it does, Excel returns strong. If it does not, Excel performs the second test. It asks whether the location is at least 90% of the target. If that condition is true, Excel returns watch. If neither condition is true, Excel returns below target. Nested if functions can be useful, but be careful. As the logic becomes more complicated, formulas become harder to read and audit. For simple decisions, a basic if is usually better. For more complex decision trees, there are other Excel functions we can use, and we'll cover those in future lessons. Let's review the most common problems with if functions. The first problem is using the wrong comparison operator. If the business rule says greater than or equal to, but the formula uses greater than, values exactly at the threshold will be classified incorrectly. The second problem is reversing the true and false results. Excel will accept the formula, but your report will be wrong. The third problem is referencing the wrong cell. If the formula is supposed to compare actual to budget, make sure it is actually comparing the actual cell to the budget cell. The fourth problem is hard coding assumptions. If the threshold may change, put it in a separate assumption cell and use an absolute reference. The fifth problem is building overly complicated nested if formulas. If you have several layers of logic, stop and ask whether the formula can be simplified. When auditing a report, verify the source data, verify the formula, test the true result, test the false result, and test the exact threshold. Confirm that Excel returns the expected result. Confirm that Excel changes to the other result. This is especially important when using greater than or equal to versus greater than. A good controller does not simply check whether Excel displays a result. We test the logic using known scenarios. For a critical financial report, document the business rule, test the formula, compare results to an independent calculation, and investigate anything that does not agree with the expected outcome. Now it's time to practice. I've created a workbook for this lesson with 3 financial reporting exercises. Start with the budget versus actual worksheet. Your first goal is to make Excel identify the departments that require attention. Next, move to the revenue tracking worksheet. Finally, open the regional performance worksheet. After you finish, test your formulas. Change a source value so the condition is true. Then change it so the condition is false. Then test the exact threshold. If your formulas respond correctly in all three cases, you have tested the basic logic behind your if functions. Today we learned how to use the if function to add decision-making logic to Excel. We learned the three basic parts of an if function: the condition, the result when the condition is true, and the result when the condition is false. We used if functions for budget versus actual analysis, revenue performance, variance review, operational KPIs, and management reporting. We also learned how to combine if with other functions, use absolute references for assumptions, and build simple nested if formulas. The larger lesson is that formulas can do more than calculate numbers. They can identify exceptions, flag problems, classify results, and focus management attention. That makes if functions useful across budgeting, forecasting, reconciliations, financial reporting, dashboards, and operational analytics. But remember, a formula can be technically correct and still be logically wrong. Always start with the business rule. Decide exactly what you want Excel to evaluate. Define what should happen when the condition is true, define what should happen when it is false, and then build the formula. Download the practice workbook and complete the exercises. Change the source values and test your formulas from both sides of the condition. In the next lesson, we'll take our if function skills further and look at functions that allow Excel to make decisions using multiple conditions and more sophisticated financial analysis. Thanks for watching Excel Controller. I'll see you in the next lesson.